and welcome to Foundation's new interview series. We're calling Welcome to the Wild Wild Web. My name is Evan Palmer. I am a member of the People and Talent team here at Foundation. I'm joined by my co-host, Junie Kwan. She is a senior member of our go-to-market team. Hi, Junie. We're excited to bring this interview series to the Web3 community where we are going to be meeting people who are pioneering new on-chain consumer experiences. At Foundation, we really love seeing talented people out in the crypto marketplace being able to push Web3 into spaces that can be massively adopted by the world. And we really believe in the importance of world-class product experiences. For our inaugural guest, we wanted to stay within the Foundation family. And so for the last 4 years, we've been working and perfecting tools and infrastructure to connect creators with millions of collectors around the world. But the next evolution of Foundation is here with Rodeo, rodeo.club if you're unfamiliar, which is truly pushing the boundaries of what on-chain social means. So today we're joined by Foundation's lead designer, Chris Biron. Hi, Chris. Chris is a multidisciplinary designer. He's currently based in London with his family. He's worked across industries of tech, advertising, sports, but now has found a home within the sort of world, the Web3 space. Chris has been a major contributor and influencer on Web3 consumer design as a whole. And you can see his work in creating world-class experiences at Foundation's marketplace. But now Chris is helping lead the charge in tackling a brand new frontier, Web3 social, with Foundation's new product, Rodeo. So with that, welcome, Chris. Welcome to the interview.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice intro.
Yes. How's your day going so far? How are things in London?
It's pretty good. It's sunny, which is pretty rare, but
Yeah.
summer's actually finally hit. So yeah, just enjoying that.
Nice. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with Junie and I. How we like to start, we're going to want to start these conversations is really getting to know who Chris was pre-Web3 world, right? And how you got into being a designer. And so how we like to start some of these conversations is really understanding, like, as a designer or someone who appreciates design, like, what was your first memory that you can think of when you saw great design out in the world?
Yeah, I think probably not exactly a common one, but probably just playing video games and getting into like digital experiences for the first time is what got me excited about design in general. Like I'm a 90s kid, so grew up with like a Nintendo 64 and stuff. And I don't know. I always think like game design is probably one of it's like the pinnacle of design for me from like an interaction point of view. Like a game has to be super fun and engaging. So like I think really good design happens in games. If you enjoy a game, it's because it's designed really well. So
What
yeah,
what game do you remember from your childhood that was like the one that really sticks with you?
I mean, I love Super Mario 64, where
Classic.
like a cool example is like you're going through these like portals in the wall to get into a level, and it's so like immersive, and this story is there. You're in this like castle doing backflips, and then you go through this painting, and then you're in a new world. It's like that's cool design. Like we need
Hmm.
some portals happening in our app.
Yeah, add it to the roadmap, right? So yeah, you started like video design and so like I said, interaction design was sort of your gateway into seeing great design. And I'm curious, like I said, as a fellow 90s kid, born straight at 90, that's when I was born, but not to age myself, but I'm curious, like, what was sort of that shift into sort of internet culture and experience and design control, like, sort of influence going into that space at all, and what was sort of that intersection?
Yeah, I mean, I'm someone who has always been obsessed with gadgets and computers. So yeah, growing up in the 90s was the perfect time for me. I got all these things, the internet started coming about. I was immediately obsessed with it. And then yeah, started really getting into like the design side of the internet when things like MySpace came out. I taught myself CSS so I could like put sparkly cursors on my profile and change the font colors to something that was completely like, you know, garish and unlegible. But yeah, I used to make themes for my friends and stuff, and that's kind of how I really got into design. It was like a natural progression from just being someone who'd like to mess around with things online.
Cool. And when you were starting to get into sort of internet design, was that sort of like your sort of area of sort of focus and high interest, or were you doing like more like classic design outside of like digital design?
Yeah, I have a quick follow-up question to that actually, Chris, because I know that you call yourself a practical designer. And I think with product design, sometimes it's like people don't quite understand like do you do the visual aspects, right? Because like visual aspects are just, what everyday users pay attention to. And so like to what extent, does something like the aesthetics or how do you incorporate that into your work? And then also just kind of talking more about like what do you mean by like being a practical designer? What does that mean to you?
I think as a product designer, it's kind of a hard role for many people to understand. They're like, oh, so what do? You like choose the colors, the typography, you do the UI stuff, and then
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's product design. So you also do UX. So how you think, but really being a product designer, you have to do absolutely everything. Like in my day to day, I'm coming up with ideas for things that we can work on. I then write the copy. Language is so important. Like if you're using lorem ipsum or something, like you're not a product designer at that point. You're, maybe it's good for like a graphic designer, but once you get into product, it's really about the feeling of every moment. Um, there's interaction designed. What happens when you tap that button? How does that transition feel? Why do we make it transition in a certain way? What do we load at what point? You have to understand development. You have to understand people's emotions in different actions. You have to understand like color theory. This is why I love it, because you have to really be a jack of all trades to be a good product designer. It's not a very specified role. Um, and that's why, yeah, in general, I think of myself as like a practical designer, because if I don't know how to do something, I have to teach myself how to do it. I don't go and study and then come back and spend a month training and then be like, oh, I can do that now. I just have to do it. So like a good example is the other day I needed to create something in 3D and I've never used 3D software at all. And I went and found, 3D software online, one called Spline, and now I'm pretty comfortable in using that and I'm using it day to day. Um, and that's kind of true for all different aspects of design. So yeah, I think being a practical designer is extremely important if you want to build products.
Uh, my last question for you before we dive into Web3, and I think this is more as a broader, like as a designer philosophy in terms of like skill set and background, right? Because again, there's a lot of journeys that designers take to get to being a product designer or a designer professionally, and I think that like you've done so well in your career as being, like I said earlier, like truly multidisciplinary, and we've seen through your career doing like visual or even like posters to product, and like you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want to dig a little bit deeper. I want to understand like what do you see as like truly having had to design across a lot of different mediums and surfaces and stuff as a as an asset to being a great product designer?
Yeah, so when I started off in my career, I did an internship at like a startup studio, and I was actually hired as a front end developer. Uh, and then as I got there, I was an intern, and they were just making me work on like the projects that no one else wanted to work on. And they were like, "Oh, can you design them as well?" So ended up being a designer and a developer, and that kind of like kicked me off on this path of being someone who just all different types of things. And then yeah, I did that for quite a few years, worked with all different sizes of clients from like, tiny little startups through to like massive agencies or companies. I then went freelance for quite a bit, and that helped me sort of like hone my business skills, something you don't really get when you're a
Oh
junior
yeah.
at a company. You kind of just do what you're told. Going
Okay.
freelance is a really good way to sort of like dive into the deep end and learn how to manage yourself, manage your own time, manage your own projects, manage relationships with people that you don't always have to do when you're a junior in a company. And it led me to work with some, really interesting companies. I was working with Google at Creative Lab for quite a while. I was traveling at the same sort of time, living that like nomad lifestyles in like Southeast Asia and designing for clients who are in America, like doing calls at crazy time zones. But I think, yeah, going down that sort of path does sort of lead you to being a product designer. When I started off, I wasn't a product designer, but I got all the skills to be a product designer by working for all different types of places. At one point, I was working as like the interim creative director for an esports brand, Fnatic. They're like one of the longest or one of the oldest esports brands, and I did like a full brand redesign for them, redid their logo, worked with videographers, did fashion drops, like apparel, all sorts of stuff. And I can't say like I do exactly that now on Rodeo, but the skills I got and through each piece of my journey do translate to my work at Foundation. So yeah, I think being super broad across all sorts of design mediums really sets you up to be a product designer and then also to be like a Web3 product designer, because in Web3 it's like a whole new set of problems that are coming up, and you need to be able to like lean on experiences that you've had in other worlds and be like, oh yeah, I can bring that sort of knowledge back into this. It's obviously different, but having a lot of different experiences is super helpful there.
Cool. Yeah, so I think we love to obviously dive a little bit more into, obviously, like I said, getting into sort of Web3 design specifically and understanding sort of how you transition into this space.
Yeah, I think so. I think what I'd love to hear more about Chris is actually like everyone tells me, everyone is always like, Chris is such a pro. Like when you work with him, it's like it's just giving pro energy. And so I'm like particularly excited to like talk to you today more about, and I think like because what I've noticed from working with you is just that it's this almost like you're so great at guessing what people need and are looking for. Like you have like this intuition. So like even when I've asked for like, hey, I need like I've noticed this change in the product, I need some way to like share it on the marketing end. And like every time you've really delivered, and I'm like, yes, this is exactly the message that I was looking for, with sometimes very little direction because we're just moving so quickly. I just like to know, like, how does one develop something like that, like an intuition, or like how do you develop that like muscle? Like what has been helpful for you over the years?
Well, firstly, thank you. That's super kind. I think it's kind of an easier thing to do when you're a designer, because design is usually a very early part of the process. So I'm in there from the very concept of an idea all the way until it's like out there in production. I go along that entire journey, and our team is pretty small. So I get to do that for basically every single thing that we do. So I don't think there's many people who have more context into what we're trying to build, what we're trying to achieve, what we've done before. And I can sort of like lean on all of that, take all of those experiences, and then apply it when I'm asked for something new. I can like, yeah, dig into the archive in my mind and really try to think what we've like tried to achieve or what we've done in the past, and sort of use that to like try and make things quickly. I think that's what enables me to work quickly. That's what people tell me sometimes is, oh, but you do stuff so fast. It's like the only reason I can do things so fast is because I've been doing all of them for a long time. Like someone who's coming in and experience it for the first time, of course they can't get there immediately. It takes a bit of time. But once you've been working in it for a couple of years, yeah, just having that sort of experience allows you to like really think on your feet and sort of in some ways feel like you're taking some sort of initiative that other people might not see. But yeah, I don't really think of it as like a massive skill that I have. I think I'm just very fortunate in the position.
Yeah, so I'm gonna follow that up with kind of a controversial question, which is, and I think like people sometimes talk about design this way, and the way that they talk about kind of just like personal taste. And for some people, I think it's like they think it's like you either have the instinct or you don't. And what do you think? Like, is it just kind of like a natural thing, or do you think that design instinct and like taste or craft or whatever, like some people just have the touch, or do you think it's something that can be built and learned over time?
I mean, I think it depends what aspect of design you're talking about. I think being somebody who can design a product well, I think anyone can do it. I think there's logical steps that you have to take. There's ways of thinking that you do have to learn, but then once you've learned them, they're not very hard to grasp. And then once you get those like basic pieces together, as long as you sort of like dedicate your time to it and and sort of like spend the time to explore different areas, you can come up with good concepts. However, the sort of more aesthetic side, I do think that there's some level of, I don't think it's that you can't learn it, but it's so defined by who you are as a person, where you live, the culture you're sort of absorbing every day. I don't think that someone who lives in one place in the world can then think exactly the same as someone who lives in another place of the world and has a
Right.
completely different day-to-day experience. And that's for your entire life. Like everything that's happened to me, all the places I've been, all the
Right.
people I've known, they all somehow have an influence on me being able to come up with a creative idea. And there's not like unique thing. And if anyone else was in my situation, I think they could think in the same way. But I can't look at someone on the internet who's an amazing designer and be like, how can I come up with those kind of ideas? It's like, well, experience their entire life and then you'll be able to. So it's not that it can't be learned. It's just it's not something you can sort of teach yourself over. You've got to experience life and that helps you become a creative.
Yeah, that's super cool. And so I think that really connects to how you talk about you're not a traditionally trained designer. You know, you're self-taught, you learned on the ground. I think you've mentioned us before that you like sort of learned by designing MySpace themes. And so I can see how that really connects to kind of your principles on just like go live life, like go experience things. And so with that said, I often find with folks who are like really self-taught and like in designing online and using software and computers and that they're very chronically online. And so I think my question is how chronically online are you?
I have a newborn son. He's 1 year old now. So I'm definitely not as online as I used to be. My time's taken up elsewhere now. But I would say that it's not just about being online, it's about experiencing and playing with gadgets and tech. It's the same thing I was doing when I was a child. I grew up, every new thing that came out, every poster for a new gadget you saw, I wanted it. And now I have the same thing, except it's all on this device that's in my pocket all day long. There's so many like amazing creative people out there making things and building little like digital gadgets essentially. So I'm the kind of person who has like 50 test flight apps. Most of
Right.
them don't even work. I've got the like new software installed on my phone from like iOS. My phone doesn't work anymore. It's broken, but
Right. Yeah, like,
I can't not do it. I have to get everything and try it immediately. So it's not, for me, it's not so much about being like online. I'm not like someone who is scrolling TikTok all day long or is like always messaging people on Instagram or whatever. But I am just like constantly absorbing things that are being made because I like I like using them. If I get a new phone, I download every game I can on the App Store and try them all. Like if I go on Twitter and see someone has built a new app, I immediately try and get it. And if there's no public link, I'll DM them, hey, I'll test your app for you. And yeah, that's just kind of how I am. So definitely like,
Yeah, I can relate. I think we can all relate here.
Yeah. Yes.
So I think I'd also love to learn more about like how did you transition from, just, being this online person. I know you have a newborn now. I myself, I don't have a newborn, but I have a puppy. But in general, just always trying to balance, being online and, being offline. I think that's always kind of tricky. But how do you sort of transition from that to now into Web3? Because I feel like people kind of enter into Web3 in all sorts of different ways. What was that like for you?
I think it comes down to the same thing. It's a new technology, and I just couldn't not try it and play with it. As soon as I saw
Right.
people talking about it, things that they're doing, I was like, cool, I'm gonna get a wallet, I'm gonna try this thing. And that sort of like need to just constantly be discovering new things led me to Web3 essentially. My sort of experience of getting in. I wasn't someone who was like, oh, I've been in Bitcoin since forever. You guys are so late. I don't care about that kind of stuff. I'm not here to just like make loads of speculative money, but I'm here to like make products and play with products and make experiences that weren't possible before. So
Uh,
the thing that like got me hooked was the game. It's like always, if there's a game on it, it's like something that will get me in. There's this game called World Wide Web, and it was released like, I don't know, the first one was released a couple of years ago, and you could basically connect your wallet to it. Then if you had an ENS, your character in the game had your ENS below it. So my little guy running around said like Byron.eth. And I was like, this is like the most magical experience. How does it know it's me? Like I haven't given it any information yet. It has my information. This is like, the magic of the blockchain, public and open database. But at that time, like first experiencing it, that was like, yeah, just amazing to me. So that was the experience that got me in. Lots of like mutuals online just talking about it, and then it's one of those things like once you dip your toes into the water, you can't like not go for a swim.
I love that analogy. I'm almost surprised that as a designer, because let's be real, those early days, the wallet whole situation was very clunky. So I'm surprised you weren't like totally turned off, but rather you were able to kind of like understand
he
like
saw
what
the vision. He saw the vision.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely some pretty clunky. I mean, even now, there's a lot of broken, clunky experiences. The infrastructure is getting better literally every day. It's amazing. Even if you look back 6 months from where we were then to where we are now, it's like a different landscape. And that's, again, the main reason why I'm so interested in working in this space is there's constantly new things to play with, constantly new ways to design things. We're literally changing how the space works by what we do day to day. Like we're going to design something, they'll then influence another team to do it in the same way. And then all of a sudden, everyone's doing it that way. And that's kind of
Yes.
happening with everyone. Like everyone's looking at what each other's doing, and the whole space is sort of like improving and getting better together. And I think if you look at Rodeo in a year's time, I doubt it's going to be the same as it is today in many ways. Like the whole space is going to have moved on, and we're going to have to move on with it. And that is like super interesting for me as a designer right now. It's a huge
Yeah.
challenge.
Yeah, and so I want to dive all into Rodeo, but before we get there, I also just want to know, and you touched on it kind of quickly, but just like what was that? I know, getting into Web3 was one thing, but you now work in it and you now design for it. So like what was the transition of designing from Web2 to like now designing for Web3? What were like the differences and just yeah, what did you experience?
I mean, to start with, 80, 90% of it is the same. You need to think in the same way. You need to make sure the people you're designing for understand what they're doing. They need to feel good about what they're doing. They need to enjoy it. So like the general principles don't change at all. There's a lot more like restrictions in Web3. It's like, oh, this has to work like this because that's the only thing that can happen. You have to send someone off to their wallet to sign a transaction. And even that's starting to change now. You can do stuff where, like you sign transactions for people, or you sort of like abstract things in different ways. But the general sort of design for Web3 isn't too dissimilar from Web2. There's just these like new things that come in that are sort of like boundaries that you need to work within. And that's an interesting challenge. And it's always interesting to try and improve the sort of flows that have been designed for those. You kind of look at what other places are doing, like take inspiration from them, and then you put like a wild idea out there and or work with like protocol engineers on our team and be like, hey, is this like even possible? And they're like, oh, let me like whip up a prototype or something. Then we prototype something. You're like, whoa, this is actually would be really cool if we could make it work.
Yeah.
And that's not something you do in Web2. Like Web2 stuff has been around for so long. Like every pattern that could be explored is like being explored in some way or another. Like it's much harder to innovate. In Web3, it's like kind of common to innovate.
Yeah, so speaking of, and I say this all the time, like we're still so early in this space. I think for a lot of folks, especially the ones who are super early, like kind of feel like, they've been around for a while, but like just in general, from a broader perspective, we're still early. And as you mentioned, that's why like when one person does something, it almost becomes like the standard, and then like another person sees it, kind of changes it, and everyone's always just kind of bouncing off each other. So that like, are there trends in the Web3 design space that you're seeing that have like stood out to you?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that has sort of affected how we're designing Rodeo is not needing to give the user every single possible option for what they can like do on chain. There's like if you create a smart contract, it needs previously you're thinking like, oh cool, it needs a name. What do you want to name this thing? Now with Rodeo, we whip up a smart contract and name it for you. And we realize that like people are super happy with that. They don't want to have to go and think of a name of their smart contract. All they want to do is put some media on chain. So there's a huge shift towards like simplification. And I think that that is really what is like making it a much better consumer experience. Previously, the people in the space were either like there's developers, a lot of artists came in, but there were like really early adopters who were there from like the time where it was super raw and every option was out and the UI was janky and nothing worked and you had to really want to be there to stick around. Now it's like if we did that, people would try our app and be like, doesn't work, and leave and never come back. Now you have to make it a lot smoother for people. You have to make it a lot simpler. If we continue on the route we were on, everyone's just going to leave. We have to simplify things. So I think that's a trend you're seeing in general. Everyone's going down this path. Don't make people think, just let people enjoy. Like a good product, you have fun. You're not thinking about, should I sign this transaction and do this thing on chain? What implications? Like as soon as you do that, you're not having fun anymore.
Totally. And I think we've even tweeted that out before. It's just sort of like having fun is the point of all of this. And I think that's sort of the experience that we're always wanting to deliver with Rodeo. And so speaking of, I want to get into like all the nitty-gritty design stuff with the new app. So in general, sort of where, like, I want to start from the beginning. Like we were like, we're launching a new app. You now have to design for it. Like, what was your process? Where did you start? And what was just in general your design approach for this?
I mean, Rodeo sort of came about very naturally as a sort of twist on some of the things we were building for Foundation. So we were creating or giving creators the ability to make open editions. And then as we looked into that, it kind of made us realize that there's more potential for these than just purely, selling art in a strict editioned way. Like
Mhm.
open editions sort of have this ability to infinitely scale, and therefore they can kind of be used for all different types of collecting. So that sort of led us down into this idea of Rodeo, where we would, again, what I was just talking about, just take away every option. Let's take away every option from people and just say, hey, drop your file here, and it's like done, and it's on chain, and you can like sell it. Oh, how long? They're like, oh, but I want to, sell it for this amount. Oh no, it's all done for you. You don't need to worry about how long it's for, how much it's going to cost, how many editions there are, what the allow list is, like all these options that many artists were used to thinking about and having to make a decision on when creating a smart contract. We tried to take all of that away. We're like almost like extreme about it. Like drop your
Right.
image here, press
Right.
post, and then boom, it's ready to go. Immediately, we had so much fun doing this as our like just ourselves, and we're like, whoa, this should be like how everything is. And that sort of birthed Rodeo in a sense, where we're like, if we're enjoying this so much, everyone else has a good chance to enjoy this too. So the way we designed it wasn't like it wasn't some big plan that we had. We basically just made something that we thought was great and then built on it from
Mhm.
there. And that was sort of the birth of Rodeo. It wasn't like, oh, we're gonna like make this app now and we need to
Right.
come up with an idea of what it's gonna be. It was just a progression of what we were already doing.
Yeah, I can remember when I first joined Foundation, I put my first like piece of photography on chain, and like you mentioned, the stress of just like pricing it. How do I price this? I don't understand. What thing do I use? And then as soon as I started using Rodeo, I was like, oh, I just want to share this with people that are following me, like just like fun,
Yeah.
right? And being able to just
It's
engage much more socially and light. And it's made me much more like inspired when I get up in the morning. Instead of me wanting to like go post to my Instagram story, I'm like, oh, like this will be really fun to just post on Rodeo. And I look at how I make content as a non-art person, right? Like walking to the gym. It totally shifts my perspective on how I want to post things online or on chain, I should say.
yeah, I mean it the sort of like foundation model is still like very valid for someone
Yes,
who's selling a
totally.
piece of artwork. It's very considered, you have a lot of control, and you
Yep.
can make it work in exactly the way you want to. But
Hmm.
that isn't a model for all types of like
Exactly.
content
Right.
that works
Right.
super well for art. But if you're someone who doesn't think of themselves as an artist, but you still are super interested in this space, you still want to share things on chain, you still want to like make money and share money with friends and like get into this world, creating a smart contract and playing with all the like different functions you can have on it and like changing every part of it, it's too like heavy lift. Whereas
Right.
like Rodeo is something that just makes all of that experience fun and allows
Yes.
you to just like get in and start being social with it.
I totally see that. I think when Rodeo first launched, it was like a transition from Foundation. So we naturally, started with a group of artists. And then, now it's like more and more different types of like people who might not think of themselves as creators, but like, we all create content every day. And so just
Perfect.
sharing like different kinds of just like moments from your life has become more of the norm. And so what's also been interesting to see, it's like you mentioned open editions before, but now Rodeo is completely different in that, like, we don't really see these as open editions, and it's not really about, making money per se. It's like, it's really just about, sharing, having fun. So I think like with your design approach, what I'm gathering is like you thought of simple and you thought of as least friction as possible to like
Um,
sharing something. When you first design, is scale something you think about? Like, this might be like my audience might change in the future, so
Personally,
I've got to make it like as, have the most broad appeal as possible. Or are you more like designing in the moment, like, hey, like, let's go. This is kind of what we're seeing now. Let's like focus on that.
mhm.
It's an interesting question because we didn't make Rodeo as like alternative to Foundation. They're not like, it's not like the same product just in a different way. It's different in so many ways, and it has like a completely different audience, and the types of things you're sharing on there probably aren't the same. Like some people do come and post art
Yes.
directly on Rodeo to share it, but you're not posting it thinking, I'm gonna, have an auction style experience and I want to make like 0.3 ETH here. It's like, I made this cool thing. Hey everyone, like have a look at it. Isn't it
Mhm.
cool? If you like it, mint it, collect it. But that's not why I'm sharing it. I'm sharing it to like interact with a community of people. So the scale of it is definitely massively different, because like the potential growth with Rodeo could mean that actually maybe in the end you would make more money from
Right.
posting this thing on Rodeo versus trying to sell it as a like single piece of artwork on Foundation. And that is like a really interesting model. That's what's so cool about Web3 social, right?
Yeah.
It's a open and transparent network where everybody is benefiting from the system. It's not just, you post something and then there's ads against it and you see none of that. You
Right.
post it, and if it resonates with a load of people, you make some money from it. And you're fairly like compensated for your contribution. And if you can get 5 people to mint it, awesome. If you can get 50,000 people to mint it, that's like a real like opportunity there for you. So scale potential with Rodeo is super interesting. And we're really early at the moment. We have a lot of artists who've started using Rodeo, but as you said, we're starting to see more and more different types of content on there, and that's what we want. That's what I want personally. I want to see all different types of things. I don't have just one interest. I love art. I love digital art. I love
Mhm.
browsing Foundation. It's great. But I also love, computer games. I love music. I love animals. I love cars. I want to see all different types of stuff. And anything that people are being creative with and like putting online, they can also put on chain and
Right.
distribute to like, hundreds or thousands of people. So yeah, the potential scale of Rodeo is massively exciting.
Cool. So I think like I want to combine a few questions. I know we're almost at time, but so like what with Rodeo, what has been like just what's something that you've really enjoyed in terms of designing for a Web3 social product design for Rodeo as opposed to like others? And then also kind of the future. So like what would you like to see in terms of like the future of Rodeo and where it's headed?
Um,
Or it could be
what
Web3
what I've
social in general.
Yeah, I mean what I've enjoyed designing with Rodeo is it's a sort of, it's a bit of a breath of fresh air in terms of the community that is sort of attracted towards Rodeo. It's like we can really build different communities on here, and we can make a product that so many people can see the value in and can love using. And designing for all different types of people is really interesting to me. Designing for like a very specific audience is great, and it's actually in some ways easier because you're like, oh,
Yeah.
like I know how to do this. I know what kind of aesthetic is going to work. Whereas with Rodeo, you have to make something that's like, works for all different types of groups, and that's a really fun design challenge. And then yeah, for the future of Rodeo and Web3 in general, I'm just looking forward to see it like continue to grow. More types of people realize the value that's here. I think if you go away and explain a like crypto first on chain social network to people, they're like, what, this sounds like really confusing and techy, and I don't want to be part of that. But if you
Yes.
sort of abstract it to what we're really doing and think of like, we're creating a new model where people get fairly compensated for the things that they're posting online, and it's all transparent and everyone can see how the system works, and there's no like, behind the scenes payments or stuff going on. It's like it's a really I explain it to some of my friends who have no idea about crypto in that way, and they're like, "Whoa, that sounds like really cool. Why don't we have that now?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's coming. We're building
Right.
it. Don't worry, you'll be there soon. Like I
Yeah,
could get you on early, but you don't worry, you'll be there soon."
Well,
great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for taking the time to chat with Junie and I. We want to kind of end these conversations with just sort of like highlighting something in the Web3 space outside of what we're building that you think is like some hot stuff, right? Or something you think is super unique or cool. So I'm curious, like any product out there in the sort of on-chain ecosystem that you think is like something you want to sort of bring to people's attention?
Yeah, I mean, as a, as a product designer, I really appreciate when I see a product that has like really great attention to detail. It's a very hard thing to work on because it's kind of a hard sell in a way. It's like, is this
Um,
going to get more people using our app, or is this going to like help us grow? And it's a hard thing to put your finger on. Like once you start getting analytical about it, it's like, well, maybe not. But then when you do it, people massively respect it and love it. So I think it's a pretty classic one for designers to love. But Family, the wallet app,
there
is
you go.
just a masterclass in interaction design. I think Benji and his whole team are incredibly talented, and there's parts of that app where you get this like delightful experience even though you're doing the most mundane thing, or like you do something wrong. You're like, there's like an error message, and normally it would be like error, like you did something bad, whereas they do it with some like haptic feedback and emoji pop up, and you're like, oh, that's fun, silly me, and you've just had a good experience from something that would normally you'd feel bad about.
Mhm.
So yeah, their app is like one of my favorite Web3 style apps to use. Like every day I'm like finding something new on it where I'm like, whoa, how did they even think of doing that? It's really cool.
Cool. Well, like I said, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us on the inaugural episode or edition of the series of Wild Wild Web review series or whatever we're going to call it. But yeah, thank you for your time and see everyone on chain.
Thank
yeah,
you
Awesome.
both. A
you.
lot of fun.